In our second week of a new series we started last week called On Fire. And who are we on fire for? Yeah, for Jesus. And so last week we talked about how we can be on fire for God, right? And what that looks like. And we talked about the two travelers on the road to Emmaus that ran into Jesus. And when they got close to Jesus, there's something started burning in them, right? And so we talked about how important it is to grow closer to Jesus, be with Jesus, right? Now, this week, we are going to talk about neighbors. Do you guys have neighbors? Okay, let's do a little quick test. I know it's a Sunday, you don't take tests on Sunday, but everybody raise your hand if you have one neighbor. Okay, now, keep your hands up. Keep your hand up if you have 3 neighbors. Okay, you still have some hands up. How about this one? How about 5 neighbors? How many of you know 5 neighbors? Wow, you guys know a lot of people, right? You have a lot of neighbors. And that's actually what we're going to talk about today, because Jesus teaches us how we should treat our neighbors. In fact, Jesus looked at neighbors a little different than we do. So we think about neighborhoods like this. And we think our neighbors are people that live around us or on our street or in our cul-de-sac or something like that, right? But see, Jesus defines being a neighbor as anybody that we're close to. Anybody that we're close by. So you're sitting amongst all your neighbors right now, right? Your teacher in school can be your neighbor. Your classmates are your neighbors, right? You go to a grocery store and you're around people there. Jesus said they're our neighbors too. In fact, some of you might play sports. Think about this one. The team you're playing against is your neighbor. They're your neighbors too. So Jesus, he actually talked about this. It's the second most important thing that Jesus told us. The most important thing was to love God. And number 2 was love your neighbor. So if Jesus said it's the second most important thing, it must be pretty important to do, right? So that's what we're going to talk about today, because we heard about people being on fire for God last week. But how can we be on fire for our neighbors? All right, so we're going to try to figure out how we share our heart for Jesus with our neighbors. So I have one more question, though. Do you like all of your neighbors? Sometimes that's hard, right? Now catch this. Jesus didn't say like your neighbors. He said love them. Right? So I know, you guys know I played soccer my whole life. And I played on a couple different teams. And one team had different people from all kinds of high schools around our area. And we would travel and go to tournaments and play. And so I got to know these guys that I played with. Well, then our high schools played each other. I didn't like them anymore, right? They were on the other team. In fact, there were 2 twins, and I remember the game like it was yesterday. These guys wanted to take me out of the game. They were slide tackling me. They were doing all kinds of stuff. They wouldn't leave me alone. They were covering me anywhere I went on the field. I didn't like them. In fact, that game, I had 3 penalty kicks. They took me out 3 times in the box. I couldn't believe it. I didn't like them. You know who else didn't like people? Jesus' friends. So we've talked about the disciples a lot, right? They're learning from Jesus, but there was a group of people the disciples didn't like. Everybody on 3 say Samaria. 1, 2, 3. Samaria. Right. So we're going to pick up this story where Jesus shows us how to love our neighbor. So he showed us. He was a perfect example of that. And where we're going to go, we're going to start with a well. Let's go ahead and put up that first point, Owen. Jesus was on fire for his neighbors, so we can be on fire too. He showed us how to do this. So we'll pick it up. He goes to this well, and he's just hanging out at the well in the afternoon. Really hot sun. He's thirsty. He's just hanging out at this well, and he has no bucket to get any water out of the well. So, like, you had to go to a well and get water. We can walk over to a water fountain and get some water, right? Or a sink in your kitchen. But they had to go to a well, but you needed a bucket and you needed a rope to lower the bucket down to get the water. Well, he didn't have any of this stuff. So he's just sitting out, hanging out, and this woman comes to the well in the middle of the afternoon. And she's from Samaria. Dun, dun, dun. Right? In fact, we'll pick it up in John chapter 4. It tells us this story where in verse 7, this woman sees Jesus and they don't get along. See, Jesus was a Jew, and Jews and Samaritans didn't get along. And so this woman, Jesus is talking to this woman, and this woman is surprised for a couple of reasons. One is, she says, well, Jews refuse to have anything to do with Samaritans. So you're not even supposed to be talking to me. Right? And she's a woman. Back in this day, it wasn't common for men to talk to women. Right? So she says to Jesus, you're a Jew and I'm a Samaritan woman. Why are you asking me for a drink? So he's like, hey, can I have a drink of water? She's like, what are you doing? We're not friends. We're not neighbors. Yeah. She's talking to the wrong person. In fact, it's a really cool story where Jesus starts telling the woman all about her. And he's sharing, well, I know this about you. I know that about you. And he's teaching her that he loves her. He loves his neighbor. So we can pick it up in verse 9. Then his disciples show up. So Jesus is at this well. He's talking to this woman from Samaria. The disciples don't like Samaritans. And they walk up and they're looking at him like, what are you doing, man? You're not supposed to be talking to her. You're talking to a Samaritan. But see how it says none of them had the nerve to ask him, why are you talking to her? So in that moment, Jesus is doing two things. He's showing the woman how to love your neighbor. And he's also teaching the disciples, guys, this is what it's like to love your neighbor. He's doing two things in that moment. Which brings us to our second point. Our second point is being on fire for your neighbor means you will invite them to see Jesus. You'll invite them to see Jesus. Just like the two travelers. After they met Jesus, they went and told everybody their story. So let's see what the woman does. The woman goes back to her village. So she, now spending time with Jesus, now she's on fire for Jesus. And she leaves her water there. She came to the well to get water. She leaves her water jar there. And she ran back to the village, telling one or two people, right? What does it say? Telling everyone. She goes to her village and she's telling everybody, man, you got to come meet this guy. He told me things that he shouldn't have known about me. He's sharing love with me. You got to come see him. So the village, the people came streaming from the village to see him. Now again, the disciples are seeing this and they're like, wow, we're not supposed to talk to these people. But if Jesus is showing us what we should do, then maybe we should do that. So in that moment, Jesus is showing them what to do. Now, she tells everyone, the village comes out, and that's where we're going to just kind of sit for a second. What does it mean for us to love our neighbors? And so I have a few questions for you. Let's go ahead and put them up. What does it mean? How do I see others? Do I see others the way God sees them? Or do I leave people out? Do I include everybody, or do I leave people out? Yeah, because that's what Jesus showed us. He didn't exclude the woman at the well. He included her. Right? The second question up here. How we talk to and about others. Are we positive? Are we reassuring? Are we kind? Or do we join in when people are talking bad about others? So you walk up to a friend and he's saying something bad about another person in your class. Do you join in? Or do you say, well, wait a second, you shouldn't talk about people like that, because we should love them. And then the third question up there, how do we act towards others? You know, one of the things about our human nature, like if I'm having a bad day, I might choose to put you down to make me feel better. Like I might look at you and say, yeah, you're short, you're too short, or I'm better at soccer than you. What I'm doing is I'm trying to make myself feel better by putting other people down. Or do we build people up? Do we see them the way that Jesus sees them? And we don't have to like everybody, but Jesus said the second most important thing is to love your neighbors. And Jesus gives us a perfect example of that. So when we're on fire for God, and we have a heart for God, and we want to tell everybody, we can love other people. Just like Jesus showed at this well that he loved a woman that he shouldn't have. All right, so as we wrap up, I'm going to say a prayer, and I'm going to pray some specific things, okay? Because we want to arm ourselves with that fire so we can share it with other people. So, 1, 2, 3. God, thank you for this illustration. Thank you for having Jesus show us what it's like to love our neighbor. And God, we want to see our neighbors the way that you see them. Give us your eyes so we can see our neighbors and we can choose to love them. Help us love our neighbors in lots of different ways, whether in words or in actions. Help us love our neighbors the way that you want us to love them. And God, help me treat our neighbors the way that you would want me to treat them. Please help all of us in here have that fire and want to share about you. That fire that you put inside of us that burns for you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.